During our baby shower, my wife said, "Let's not let your cousin come inside." I asked, "Why?" She said, "He's not who you think." Days later, I never questioned her again. I didn't know it at the time, but those words marked the beginning of the most dangerous week of my life. The laughter, the pastel decorations, the clinking of glasses. All of it feels distant now, like a photo from someone else's party. I was tired, hopeful, completely blind to what was coming. Sophie saw it first. She always did, and I didn't listen. I was balancing a plate of food in one hand and refilling someone's drink when I saw Mark's car pull up along the curb. My chest warmed with that automatic familiarity. This was my cousin, my oldest friend, the guy who knew every embarrassing story about me and never let me forget them. Then Sophie appeared at my side so fast I almost spilled the punch. She positioned herself in front of me, eyes locked on the driveway. Her smile didn't waver for the guests, but her voice was flat. "Let's not let your cousin come inside." I blinked, thinking I'd misheard her over the hum of conversation. "What?" She glanced at me, then at him again. "He's not who you think." My eyebrows pulled together. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Please," she said, just above a whisper. "Trust me on this." I glanced toward Mark. He was stepping out of the car, holding a gift bag with bright tissue paper poking out, grinning like he was already part of the party. My instinct was to wave him over because why wouldn't I? Mark was family. We'd spent summers building tree forts, winters sledding down the old hill, teenage years getting into trouble, and covering for each other. I turned back to Sophie. "This is ridiculous." "It's Mark." Her jaw tightened. "Exactly." Something in her tone should have made me stop, but I was in host mode, and we had 50 people in the backyard. The last thing I wanted was to start a scene at our own baby shower. I brushed past her with a tight smile and strode toward the gate. "Mark, you made it," I called. He clapped me on the shoulder as we shook hands. "Wouldn't miss it, man." When I glanced back at Sophie, she'd already retreated toward Leah, her younger sister. The two of them spoke quietly, heads bent close. For the next hour, I tried to ignore the tension. Mark mingled easily, telling jokes to my uncles, complimenting the food, making the kind of small talk that made it impossible to imagine why Sophie had been so hostile. Still, I couldn't help noticing her behavior. The way she'd drift to another part of the yard if he got too close. The way her smile vanished the moment she turned away from him. When it came time to open gifts, she made sure Leah sat beside her while I moved from chair to chair, thanking people. Mark handed me his gift, a soft blanket and a set of baby clothes, and I told him they were perfect. Sophie didn't say a word. I tried catching her eye, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of conversations, photos, and cake. By the time the last guests left, the sky was turning gold, and the yard looked like a storm had passed through. Empty cups, paper plates, and confetti scattered on the grass. Inside, Sophie was in the kitchen rinsing glasses. I leaned on the counter. "Want to tell me what that was about?" She didn't look up. "What?" "You know what, Mark. You wouldn't talk to him, you wouldn't even look at him." Her hands stilled under the running water. "He's not who you think," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a weight in it. "I've heard things before. Nothing I could prove, but enough that I don't want him near the baby." "That's not an explanation," I said, keeping my voice low. "It's a riddle. If you've got a problem with him, say it." She turned then, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I'm telling you to be careful. That's all I'm saying." I exhaled sharply. "Careful of what?" "He's my cousin, sophomore. We grew up together." Her expression didn't change. I felt the irritation building, but I didn't want this to spiral into a fight. We were both exhausted from hosting, and she was months pregnant. I pushed off the counter. "You're overreacting. Forget it." I went to the living room, turned on the TV, and drowned the conversation in noise. I didn't see the way she stood in the kitchen for a long moment after, gripping the counter like she was trying to steady herself. I didn't see her glance toward the hallway, toward the closed door of the nursery. If I had, maybe I would have realized she wasn't being paranoid at all. 2 days later, the house was almost unnervingly quiet. Sophie had gone out to run errands, leaving me alone at the kitchen table with my laptop and a mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm while I lost myself in emails. Outside, the sunlight was pale and flat, a thin layer of clouds dulling the morning. The phone rang, breaking the monotony. I didn't recognize the number right away, but when I answered, Leah's voice came through, cautious. "Hey, Daniel, you got a minute?" "Sure," I said, leaning back in my chair. "What's up?" There was a pause, like she was rehearsing something. "It's about Mark." I sighed, already feeling the familiar irritation from the baby shower creeping back. "Leah, if this is about Sunday, I've already heard Sophie's take." "It's not just Sunday," she cut in, her voice low. "She's been worried about him for months." I frowned. "Worried how?" "I don't know everything," Leah admitted, "but I've seen some stuff online, things he's posted, people he's with, and I've overheard bits of conversations. Sketchy conversations." I ran a hand over my face. "You're gonna have to be more specific." "That's the thing, I can't be. It's not like I have screenshots or proof. It's just, there's something off about him lately. The way he talks, who he talks to. Sophie's been keeping an eye out, but she doesn't want to drag you into it without something concrete." I stared at the ceiling, trying to decide whether I was annoyed, concerned, or both. "Leah, I've known Mark my whole life. He's been through a rough patch here and there, but who hasn't? I think you guys are reading too much into." "Daniel," she said sharply, "sometimes you don't need proof to know when something's wrong." Her tone hung there for a beat before she softened. "Just don't ignore her, okay?" I gave a non-committal grunt and changed the subject. We talked about Sophie's pregnancy for a few more minutes before hanging up, but the conversation stuck with me longer than I wanted to admit. That night, after dinner, Sophie and I went through our usual routine, cleaning up the kitchen, checking her prenatal vitamins, and getting ready for bed. She moved more slowly these days, but with a strange, deliberate focus, like every action had weight. When I came out of the bathroom, I found her standing in the hallway outside the nursery. The door was closed, and she had her hand on the knob. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just making sure it's locked," she said without turning around. "The nursery?" I stepped closer. "Why would it be locked? No one's here." "It makes me feel better," she said simply, twisting the lock before heading toward our bedroom. I didn't push it. By now, I knew better than to turn everything into an argument, but the unease was starting to creep in. The next morning, I went into the nursery to check on the crib we'd ordered. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the half-assembled furniture. I reached for the baby monitor on the dresser and froze. It wasn't where we'd left it. The small white device had been moved about a foot to the left, its angle shifted toward the door instead of the crib. I stared at it for a long moment, replaying in my head how we'd set it up. Sophie wouldn't have moved it without telling me. She'd been the one to obsess over getting the perfect angle on the crib. I adjusted it back, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe Sophie had bumped it while dusting. Maybe I had and didn't remember, but the thought stuck like a splinter under my skin. As the day went on, I noticed Sophie growing quieter, even around me. She smiled less, laughed less. Her phone stayed close to her, face down on the counter. She jumped at small noises, like the hum of the fridge kicking on or a car door slamming outside. By evening, the tension in the house felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. She sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her, hands resting on her stomach, eyes fixed on the muted TV. I sat beside her, but it felt like there was a wall between us, one she'd built and I couldn't climb. When I asked if she was okay, she just said, "I'm fine," in that clipped way that meant she wasn't. And for the first time, I started to wonder if maybe Leah was right. Maybe something was wrong. It was just after midnight when the doorbell rang. I'd been drifting in that hazy space between sleep and wake, rain pattering against the windows, the room dim except for the amber glow of the streetlights spilling through the blinds. Sophie stirred beside me, murmuring something I couldn't make out. The bell rang again, longer this time. I sat up, the hair on my arms standing up before my brain even caught up. People didn't come to your door at this hour unless something was wrong. Sophie pushed herself up on her elbows. "Who is it?" "I don't know," I said, already pulling on the t-shirt draped over the chair. The rain had picked up, tapping harder against the glass as I padded down the hallway. I flipped on the porch light, squinting through the peephole. 2 uniformed officers stood there, their dark jackets glistening with rain. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, knocked again. I opened the door a few inches. "Yeah, Mr. Grant?" the tall one asked. "Yes. I'm Officer Ramirez, this is Officer Daniels. We're looking for your cousin, Mark Holloway. Is he here?" For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "Mark? No, he's not here. Why? What's going on?" Ramirez's gaze stayed steady on mine, professional but sharp. "Do you know where he is right now?" "No," I said slowly. "Last time I saw him was 2 days ago, at our baby shower." That seemed to register with him. He exchanged a glance with Daniels. "Sir, your cousin is currently a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. We have reason to believe he may have been in this area recently." I felt my stomach knot. "What kind of investigation?" Ramirez didn't hesitate. "Multiple counts of theft, including stolen property from private residences. There are also other allegations under review. Serious ones." Sophie's voice came from behind me, quiet but sharp. "What kind of allegations?" Ramirez turned his attention to her. "Ma'am, we can't disclose all the details, but part of our investigation involves an incident here, specifically your nursery." I froze. "Our nursery?" Ramirez reached into a waterproof folder and pulled out a glossy printout. He held it out to me. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at, the grainy, black and white still from a baby monitor camera. The angle was from above, tilted slightly toward the crib. And standing in the middle of the room at 2 in the morning was Mark. He wasn't smiling. His head was slightly bent, as if he were scanning the room. One hand was in his jacket pocket. The other was reaching toward the dresser. I couldn't breathe for a second. The timestamp was the night before the baby shower. "This was taken from your own device," Ramirez said. "The signal on your monitor isn't fully encrypted," he explained. "We found this clip on a hard drive seized during a related search. Someone had been intercepting and saving the feed. We traced it back to your property, and your cousin was on it." My mind raced. "Looking for what?" "We don't know yet," Ramirez said. "But given the timeline, we need to know if you've noticed anything missing. Documents, valuables, personal items." I shook my head slowly. "No, I mean not that I can think of." Sophie was still standing behind me, but I could feel her eyes burning into the side of my face. "I told you," she said quietly. Ramirez glanced between us. "We're going to keep a patrol in the area tonight, just in case he comes back. If you see him, do not engage. Call us immediately." They left after taking my number, their cruiser's headlights cutting across the wet street before disappearing into the dark. I closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, listening to the rain and my own breathing. Sophie broke the silence. "Do you believe me now?" I turned toward her. "Why didn't you tell me? If you knew something." "I didn't know," she said firmly. "Not until recently. I suspected. But suspicion isn't proof. You could have said something." "I did," she snapped. "I told you he wasn't who you think. I told you to keep him out. And you waved him right in." Her voice cracked on that last word, but she kept her gaze locked on mine. I sank onto the couch, running a hand through my hair. "What do you mean you suspected?" She hesitated, then sat across from me. "Leah told me a few months ago she saw Mark arguing with someone outside her apartment building. It got ugly. He was shouting about people keeping what's his and making veiled threats about kids. I didn't want to believe her. But then I started noticing things, him showing up at family events uninvited, asking weird questions about the baby's due date, about the nursery. And then, she stopped. "What?" She swallowed hard. "About a week before the shower, I came home early from an appointment. I saw his car parked 2 blocks away from our house. He wasn't inside it. I circled the block, and by the time I came back, it was gone." I stared at her. "Why didn't you tell me that?" "Because I didn't have proof he'd actually done anything. And I knew you'd defend him. You always do." I wanted to argue, to push back, but the image from the baby monitor was burned into my brain. Mark in our nursery at 2 in the morning, moving like he knew exactly what he was looking for. "This wasn't a casual visit," I said quietly. "He was searching for something." Sophie nodded. "That's what scares me. I don't know what." The rain kept falling outside, steady and soft, but it felt louder in the silence between us. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard the faint hum of a car engine slowing down, but when I looked through the blinds, the street was empty. I didn't sleep that night, neither did Sophie. The morning after the midnight knock felt different. Not in a dramatic Hollywood way, no lightning bolts or ominous music, just heavier. The air in the house was still, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Sophie moved around quietly, making coffee without a word, and I sat at the kitchen table pretending to read emails I wasn't processing. The baby monitor sat on the counter, its little green light blinking like it knew something I didn't. I finally pushed my laptop away. "I'm going to check something," I said, already heading for the office. Sophie didn't ask what. The security system had a habit of eating storage fast, so I kept the last 2 months of footage backed up on an external drive. I plugged it in and began scrubbing through timestamps. At first, it was the usual stuff: delivery drivers, neighborhood kids cutting across the lawn. Then I froze. 2 weeks ago, 3:17 p.m. Mark. He was walking up our driveway, glancing over his shoulder, then heading straight for the side of the house. Out of camera view. I checked the next clip. 20 minutes later, he came back the same way, his jacket zipped up despite the warm weather. I flipped to another date, 4 days before that. Same thing. Middle of the afternoon. Same glances, same quick steps. Always when Sophie and I were both at work. The pattern made my stomach turn. I called Leah. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, how are you holding up?" "Not great," I admitted. "Listen, I'm going through the cameras. Mark's been here more than we thought. Not just at night." Leah sighed. "I'm not surprised. You want me to tell you something I've been keeping to myself? Go ahead." I started keeping a little log, I guess. Every time he showed up at something without being invited. Thanksgiving? He wasn't on the guest list. Your parents' anniversary dinner? Same. My daughter's birthday? He was just there, already sitting at the table when I arrived. Like he'd been waiting. I rubbed my temples. "You're saying this has been going on for years?" "At least a year," she said. But I didn't think much of it until Sophie started asking me about him. That made me pause. "When was that?" "A couple of months ago." She said she'd overheard him on the phone once, saying something about keeping the baby safe. I frowned. "Safe? That doesn't sound." Leah cut me off. "Daniel," she said, "it wasn't in a protective way. More like he was claiming something. Like the baby was already his to protect or keep." Cold knot formed in my gut. "Jesus." Leah hesitated. "I know you don't want to believe it, but I think this goes back to your uncle's estate." That pulled me up short. My uncle passed 3 years ago. His will had been a mess. No clear executor. Assets tied up in probate for months. And yes, there'd been whispers about a family heirloom. Some coin collection that was supposedly worth more than anyone realized. But I'd stopped thinking about it ages ago. "You think this is about money?" I asked. "Maybe. Or maybe it's about a debt," Leah said. "Either way, you need to stop thinking of this as a family problem. It's a police problem." We hung up, and I sat staring at the paused footage of Mark walking away from our house. Jacket zipped, glancing over his shoulder, like a man who already knew he was doing something wrong. When I went back to the kitchen, Sophie was at the sink, rinsing her mug. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "Find anything?" "Yeah," I said. "More than I wanted to." She finally turned. "You know there's something else I haven't told you." I braced myself. "What?" "That day I saw his car parked 2 blocks away. I walked past it. He was on the phone and I heard him say, 'They can't keep it from me forever. Once the baby's here, they'll understand.'" My mouth went dry. "And you didn't." "I didn't want to scare you until I was sure. But now you've seen him in the nursery. You've heard what Leah's saying. I think he's been planning something for months." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "This is Daniel," I said. "Mr. Grant. This is Officer Ramirez." His voice was all business. "We have an update. We believe Mark is still in the area. There's been movement on one of his known vehicles less than 2 miles from your home." My grip on the phone tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means he may try to come back. If you see him, do not open the door. Call us immediately." The line went dead. I looked at Sophie. She already knew from my expression. The air in the house felt even heavier now, But this time it wasn't just tension. It was the unmistakable awareness that the clock was ticking. 3 nights later, we went to bed early. Not because we were tired, but because we were waiting. The house was dark, every light off except the dim glow from the baby monitor on my nightstand. Sophie lay beside me, her breathing slow and deliberate. I could tell she was awake by the way her fingers tapped the edge of the blanket in tiny, controlled movements. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Every creak of the house made me glance at the clock. Every distant car passing outside made my pulse spike. Officer Ramirez's warning echoed in my head. If you see him, do not open the door. It was just past midnight when the chime from the motion sensor in the driveway broke the silence. One sharp beep, then the faint whir of the security feed switching to live. I reached for my phone, my other hand already pulling Sophie gently toward the monitor screen. Stay here, I whispered. She didn't argue. On the feed, the grainy black and white image showed a familiar shape. Mark's car, rolling into the driveway with its headlights off. He parked at an angle, like he was ready to leave in a hurry. My chest tightened. I tapped Officer Ramirez's number. He picked up on the second ring. He's here, I whispered. Driveway. Lights off. Stay on the line, Ramirez said, his voice low but urgent. Units are on the way. Keep eyes on him, but do not engage. I angled the phone so I could still watch the monitor. Mark's door opened, and he stepped out slowly, wearing dark clothes. No jacket this time, just a hoodie pulled tight around his face. He glanced toward the street, then moved with deliberate steps toward the side of the house. The back door. Ramirez spoke in my ear. Still there. He's at the back, I said. My voice sounded too loud, even though I was barely above a whisper. Mark tried the handle. Slowly at first, like he was testing it. Then a sharper tug. I saw the door rattle in its frame. Locks holding, I murmured. On the feed, he stepped back, looking up toward the second floor. Then he moved out of that camera's view, and into another. The nursery window. My hand tightened around the phone. He's at the baby's window, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. I could hear Ramirez relay something to someone else. Muffled words, sharper now. Mark pulled something from his pocket. A small tool, maybe a screwdriver. He wedged it against the window frame and pushed. The lock gave a faint metallic click that I swear I could hear from upstairs. That's when the first flash of red and blue lit the driveway. Tires crunched on the gravel. 2 uniformed officers came into frame, moving fast. One shouted, "Police! Step away from the house." Mark froze for half a second, then dropped the tool and lifted his hands. It wasn't dramatic, no chase, no shouting match. Just a quick compliance, like he'd been expecting it all along. They cuffed him against the siding, one officer reading him his rights while the other picked up the dropped tool with a gloved hand. Ramirez's voice came through my phone. "We've got him. You're clear." I finally exhaled. My hands were shaking. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "It's over. They've got him," I said. My voice cracked more than I wanted it to. We went downstairs together. Through the kitchen window, I saw Mark being led to the cruiser. He didn't look at us, didn't say a word. The hood was still pulled tight, shadowing most of his face, but I caught the faintest flicker of a smirk as the door shut. Ramirez met us on the porch. "He's being taken in. We'll hold him overnight and process charges in the morning. If there's enough evidence, this won't just be trespassing." Sophie nodded but didn't speak. Inside, with the front door locked again, I turned to her. "You've been holding something back, haven't you?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she said, "He's done this before." I froze. "Before? What do you mean?" She took a slow breath. "A few years ago, before you and I got together, Mark was living with another cousin. She had a little girl. He started showing up in her room at night. Nothing was proven, but she told me he'd stand in the doorway, watching her sleep. One time, she woke up and he was sitting on the floor by her bed. The family swept it under the rug, said he was just drunk. But she kicked him out the same week." My stomach turned. "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't think it would matter to us," she said quietly, "until I heard him talking about our baby. Until I saw the way he looked at the nursery when we were setting it up." I ran a hand over my face. God, Sophie. I know, she cut in. Her voice was firm, even though her eyes glistened. But we didn't. And now he's gone. I didn't argue. Not tonight. The baby monitor's green light blinked steadily from the counter, the same way it had 3 nights ago, and 3 nights before that. Only now it didn't feel like a quiet guardian. It felt like a reminder that the line between safety and danger can be no thicker than a locked window, and no stronger than the moment you decide to believe someone's warning. A week later, the rain had moved on, but the heaviness in the house hadn't. We'd slept better the past few nights, but there was still a quiet edge to everything. Sophie kept the baby monitor close even during the day. I found myself double-checking locks before bed, then double-checking them again. Mark was still in holding. Ramirez said the DA was weighing charges, trespassing, attempted unlawful entry, maybe more depending on what they pulled from his phone. I decided I needed to see him, not because I wanted answers. I knew I wasn't going to get any, but because I wanted him to see me, not the cousin who used to share beers at family cookouts, but the man who now knew exactly what he was. The holding area smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Mark was brought in wearing county orange, cuffs on his wrists. He sat across the scratched table, leaning back in the chair like he was settling in for a casual chat. "I'm only going to ask you once," I said, leaning forward. "Why the hell were you in my house? In my kid's room?" He smiled, that slow, smug kind of smile that made me want to put my fist through the table. "Just wanted to see the family," he said, mock innocent. I didn't blink. "That's your answer? That's all you'll get," he said and leaned back again. I sat there for another 30 seconds, letting the silence stretch. He didn't fidget, didn't look away, just smiled, like this was some game and he'd already won something I didn't know about. When the guard took him back, he gave me a small wave without breaking that smile. I left before I did something that would land me in the next cell over. Back home, Sophie was on the couch with the baby, her eyes flicking toward the window when I came in. "How was it?" she asked. I shook my head. "A waste of time. He's not going to say a word." She studied me for a moment. "Then we're done with him. For good." It wasn't a suggestion. I sat beside her, watching the baby's tiny chest rise and fall. "I should have trusted you sooner," I said quietly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Yeah," she said. But then she sighed and leaned her head against my shoulder. "You listened when it mattered. Next time." "There's not going to be a next time," I cut in. She didn't answer, but her grip on my arm tightened just enough to tell me she believed it. Or wanted to. Later that afternoon, Leah stopped by. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You need new locks, deadbolts, and a security system that doesn't just beep when someone walks by." "I thought the one we had was good," I said. "It was fine," she said, until someone decided fine wasn't enough. By the end of the week, the house had new reinforced locks, window sensors, and cameras covering every angle. Sophie even added a second baby monitor, one aimed at the crib, one at the window. We made one last decision together. It wasn't up for debate. No matter what excuses the rest of the family came up with, no matter what pressure they tried to put on us, Mark would never see our child again. Not at birthdays, not at weddings, not at anything. Some lines you don't cross. And if you do, you don't get to come back. What would you have done if your spouse warned you about a family member? Would you trust them without proof? Think Daniel should have stopped Mark at the door that day? Let me know your take in the comments, and if you like stories that keep you up at night, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one.